talking with Tiffany before this session about how, there are some fantastic cases for you to go and have a look at on the platform. There's also the opportunity on the platform for you to practice case interviews with people from all around the world who are currently prepping for interviews. And I really encourage you to do that. So let's begin with our introduction to case interviews. And I'm going to stop at the end of each of these sections to give you the chance to ask questions. So why are we doing this? Why are case interviews so important? Well, they are increasingly used by top employers. And I think you're very lucky at Brown. We generally start these sessions in kind of September time. So most of your peer group, whether it's at the Ivies or other top universities, are not getting these insights until later in the recruitment cycle. You're getting ahead of the game here. And when you do come to apply for jobs in the next year, you will see that it is extremely common to use cases. Now, they are associated with the top management consulting firms, the ones on the left-hand side of this slide, BCG, where I worked, McKinsey, Bain, etc. But they are used right across business. We're even now seeing them be used in government, in non-profit. Most jobs that you apply to from an institution like yours will require a case interview. So I would say whatever you're thinking, whether or not you're focused on management consultancy, this is a really important skill to learn. I also think that some of the skills we teach in preparing for case interviews are just great business skills and organization skills to know. And whatever you do in your degree program, whatever you go on to do afterwards, these skills will hopefully be useful. So what is a case interview? Well, it lasts for 20 to 30 minutes. And I would think of it as a 20 to 30 minute version of a business problem. Imagine you are doing a real business project and you kind of boiled it down to like 20 to 30 minutes. That's a case interview. So if you think about the flow of a real business project, it kind of goes as follows. You would clarify the objective, usually with your client or with your internal sponsor. You would then develop a work plan. You'd gather information, you'd analyze information and extract insights, and you would then recommend and support actions. Now, of course, the difference is that in the real world, these would take maybe a few days on the objective clarifying, maybe a few weeks on the work plan, could be months, right, on the information and analysis. We do all of this in minutes in a real case interview. So your interviewer delivers a prompt. When you then get the chance to ask clarifying questions, we'll talk about those. The developer work plan equivalent is that you put together a structure about how you're going to take on the case. The gather information is you asking questions, getting information out of your interviewer. You then might analyze some slides, do some maths, and then ultimately you make a recommendation about the client situation. Now, there are a variety of case types. In today's session, I'm going to focus on the classic and most common type of case interview, which is a in-person or online interview where it's one or two interviewers and it's you, and you go through a more orthodox business case. However, there are many others. A lot of firms now in the early rounds are getting you to do digital cases. The BCG Casey chatbot is one example of that. Firms might ask you to do estimations or market sizings. They're not really full cases. They're more when they ask you to do a kind of brainstorming exercise, which is shorter, to see how you think. And you might do a written case. This is where you get a stack of documents, you take it away, and you put together a response. It can be over a few hours, it can be over a week. Now, case interviews help employers identify candidates with two primary qualities. Now, most of the employers I put on that slide, I describe them as looking for all-rounders. They don't just want people who are analytically strong. They want people who can work in a team, communicate, solve a problem. Cases are good at finding business all-rounders. Test a variety of skills and really test, are you an all-round business performer? This is probably the most important slide, I think, in this presentation. It is the CaseCoach scorecard. Now, the reason it's so important is that I think cases can appear very overwhelming when you first come to them. But this gives you an opportunity to break the case down into its constituent parts. And a key part of preparing well for cases is going to be assessing your performance and improving your performance and reflecting on it. If you just churn cases, you'll improve, but it's a very slow and ultimately ineffective way to improve. What you need to do is do cases and reflect on your performance in that case. And the way that you do that is break the case down into its constituent parts. How's my structuring? How's my numeracy? How's my judgment and insights? And then you can back this up with drills and focused practice to improve in your areas of weakness. Today, we are going to focus on the structuring section of this, We won't do as much on numeracy, judgment and insights, creativity, etc. However, I will show you where to find the scorecard. I'll show you where to find the drills for all of those things on CaseCoach, and you should feel completely free to ask me questions about any part of the case. It doesn't just have to be structuring. We will also analyze your personal performance. And in terms of how you need to come across in a consulting interview, you need to have strong professional presence, but you also need to be a relaxed and empathetic communicator. Okay, that is a whistle-stop introduction to case interviews. I just love to pause there and see if anyone has any questions. My absolute preference for questions is you're on camera and we make it an interactive conversation, but I understand that you might not be in a place or feeling in a place that makes that right for you. So if you want to park something in the chat, I can happily read it and answer a question. If you want to speak just an audio, that's great. But if you want to come on camera, please do put up your hand, and I'm very happy to take questions about anything I've said so far. And also, please do be thinking about whether you'd like to volunteer. Okay, I would absolutely love some of you to volunteer and come forward and do a structure with me. That would be wonderful. But do be thinking about whether or not you want to volunteer. So does anyone have any questions, or should I move on with the presentation? Okay, excellent. Thank you, everyone. Now what I'm going to go into is the case structuring foundations. I'm going to take you through the basics of how you structure a consulting case or an interview case, give you some examples, and then again, I'll pause at the end of this for questions, and then I will be looking for volunteers, and a good chunk of the rest of the session will be me looking for you to come forward and do practice with me. So structuring is really the first 5 minutes of the case. So today we're just focusing on that first 5-minute segment. It is the develop a work plan stage. So you've clarified your objective. We'll talk about how to do that. And you come in and develop a work plan. So what does that look like in a case interview? Well, imagine we were confronted with a case question, which was, should Flash acquire Lamode as part of its growth strategy? What we would then see is that we, as the candidate, have produced a structure. The first level of that is that we have broken this question down into 3 things. That's the first test of any structure. You want to try and break the question down if you can. Should Flash acquire Lamode? Well, that's a very multifaceted question, right? How valuable is Lamode? Well, that starts to become a simpler question to answer. So the candidate here has broken it down into 3 parts. And then underneath each of them, we would dive deeper. How do we work out the standalone value of Lamode? Well, that would be a matter of maybe how fast its market is growing, what its share is, or how profitable the company is. So this is what a structure looks like. It's you taking the case question and breaking it down. And you do this before you start to investigate any of this. You're basically telling the interviewer, this is what I'd like to investigate to answer this question. This is what it means in an interview. So this is what your notes might look like. On the left-hand side of the page, the candidates asked excellent questions about Flash and Lamode. We've got a clear sense of the two companies, of their size, of some of their kind of key competitive advantages, right? This is very important. You've got to ask really good clarifying questions to understand the companies. And I'll talk more about this, and we'll get the chance to practice as well. When our volunteers come forward to do cases, everyone will be enabled to ask clarifying questions. On the right-hand side here, you see our candidate structure. They've broken it down into 3 constituent questions: the standalone value, the synergies, and the capabilities to execute. And under each of those, they've broken it down into 3 areas that will help them understand that constituent part. So they've broken this down into much simpler things. Now, if you were saying, for example, what is the market growth of Lamode's market? It's much more obvious, right? What piece of information you'd ask the interviewer for or you'd want to analyze. Whereas should they acquire Lamode, it's like, where do I start? Right. So you've broken the problem down into something that's much easier to start tackling. So what are the characteristics of a good structure? It focuses on the right question. It breaks it down into an exhaustive set of independent drivers. It provides an approach to solving the case, and it shares helpful insights. We have an acronym for this at CaseCoach, and it is AIM. A good structure is answer-focused, insightful, and MECE, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. It is AIM. And I think this is a really good way to think about your structures. Now, clarifying questions. A lot of what happens in case interviews is about dealing with ambiguous situations and trying to do it in a logical and structured way. However, you can also ask some good questions to try and remove at least some of the ambiguity, and there is usually a lot at the start. You are definitely going to want to understand the client's objectives, refine or define the scope of the question, and clarify any lack of understanding you might have about, for example, who their customers are or what their business model is or what their product is. The key thing is this is not a chance to ask questions that help you answer the case. So what is Flash's market share is a bad question. Okay, this is where you ask questions to help you understand the case. You don't want to waste questions because trust me, you will feel bad asking a lot. So you don't want to waste them trying to get ahead on the case and the interviewer will just bat you back. You want to ask questions that make sure you understand the client and you understand the case question. We'll practice this a bit today, but it's a bit of a fine art asking the right clarifying questions. But some really important ones that I like are the number one clarifying question: is there a target? Okay, or anything that clarifies the client's objective. Incredibly important. The next one is who are the customers and what is the product and what is the business model? You simply have to understand how a business works. If you don't really get whether they're B2C or B2B, you cannot begin a case. If you don't understand, if they're a B2C company, if you don't understand if they're high end or low end, you can't start the case. Imagine, for example, your client is a US supermarket, right? If that supermarket is Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, or Aldi, right? That is an extremely different solution that you're going to come up with for those different businesses, right? And their different customer segments. And it's the same for a huge business versus a small business, or a rural-based organization, or a business that sells internationally. There are a lot of different things. Now, unfortunately for you all, it's not as easy as learning a set number of structures for a set number of case questions. There is an infinite variety of case questions. And in doing, well over 1,000 case interviews, I've seen them all. You get some very mainstream business ones. How could this airline increase its profits? And you get some really left field ones. How could London solve the homelessness crisis? So it's very difficult to say what you'll get. So therefore, what you need to do is develop the skill of breaking down any question rather than think I'm going to learn all of the structures and then just apply them. Now, it is worth knowing a few frameworks. Okay, so I think that, there are certain frameworks which are generally useful, understanding dynamics like supply and demand, or thinking about issues like competitors and customers, or Porter's 5 forces for a market entry. But it is not enough. You can't just reel off things that you've learned from a book. You have to develop the skill of structuring your own cases. All right, let me pause there. Because we're about to get into live practice. So would love to take your questions. If there's any doubts in anyone's mind, please do come forward. Even if you just write it in the chat, I'm happy to take it. And I would love people to start thinking about volunteering. Okay, so I'm going to need 4 or 5 people to volunteer and do cases with me. So I would love people to start thinking about volunteering. So who would like to come forward?
Happy to volunteer. Just a heads up, though, I've never done it before.
Roman, that is absolutely fine. And thank you so much for volunteering. It's brilliant that you volunteered. Thank you. Sorry, thank you.
Awesome. Happy to volunteer.
Yeah. Christopher, thank you very, very much. It's very brave of you both to break the ice and get volunteering. So I'm just going to write your names down.
Sorry, I'd love to as well.
Eshan, thank you very much. And by the way, if I mispronounce anyone's name, please correct me. But hopefully I was okay so far. Who else would like to volunteer? It's brilliant to have you 3 all come forward. Who else would like to volunteer?
I can volunteer as well.
Imam, thank you very, very much for volunteering. I think there was someone else who was about to come forward.
I'd like to, if possible.
Love it. Is it Irene? Did I get your name right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, excellent. That's 1. We've got 5, which is enough, but we can always do more. Would anyone else like to volunteer? Okay, well, we can kick off with 5 for sure. Now, no questions that you're very low on the questions as a group. Would anyone like to ask me a question about anything that's gone so far? Clarify anything before you start having to volunteer for your structures? Chris, yeah.
I guess I had a quick question. When you break down the initial problem, are you breaking it down into components of the problem, or like components of a potential solution? Although I know those kind of lead to the same thing.
They can be the same thing. So it's a great question, Chris. So Chris asked me basically, do you break down the problem or break down a potential solution? Chris, both are viable approaches. Okay. So I think there are some questions where the potential solution is a more natural way to begin the case. So let me give you an example. I say, my uncle runs a hamburger store. He's been running the business for a while. It's pretty profitable, but he just can't grow it. What are some ideas you have to grow my uncle's hamburger store, right? That one lends itself to solution-focused lens. Okay. You could be like, right, well, as an example, I'm going to break this down into, your uncle opening up new stores versus getting more growth out of his existing store. Within his existing store, I'm going to break it down, or across both. I'm going to break it down into like getting more revenue from existing product lines that he has, and then, getting more revenue from new product lines. These things like lend themselves to a solution, whereas there are other cases where it's a lot less obvious, right? Like if I was to ask you, how do we solve the homelessness crisis in London, for example, that is like, I need to learn more before I start coming up with solutions. Or a lot of cases will open up with a problem. Our clients' costs have gone up by 20% in the last year, right? what do they do? And you're like, well, what they do is largely dependent on why it's gone up, right? So first you want to find out why it's gone up. So I think both are viable. It just slightly depends on the case. Eshan, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of the frameworks, like the 4Ps, 3Cs, 4s, 5 forces, I was just curious, like, do you recommend actually like stating, like, for example, like using the 4s, 5 forces and doing the framework that way, or is it more of just like a general guide because like we're not supposed to actually use
Yeah,
like
so
only
yeah,
defined frameworks?
got it. Thank you. I would not recommend stating them, no. So they are the way I see the frameworks, and there are more complex ones than these that are more tied to cases that we'll teach you. They're great starters. Like I was teaching someone this morning in a one-to-one session, and I was saying, look, what you do is that's your first draft. Okay. You get a market entry. You're like, okay, I've got a structure that like works for most market entries. Right. That's my first draft. Now, how am I going to tweak this to make it more focused on this client and more relevant to this case? Okay. So the textbook structures can give you a first draft, but you've got to do that second draft yourself. Okay. And yeah, I wouldn't say I'm going to use the 4Cs, whatever. I would say, here's my structure, like, and I try and link it as closely as you can to this client, this case problem. All right, who else has questions? These are great questions, both of you. Who else has got questions?
I've got one. Are we supposed to tell the interviewer how we're breaking it down, or is it kind of like we just write it down ourselves for our own understanding?
Excellent question, Raymond. So you definitely want to write it down yourself, and you can probably write down the less polished version of it, right? But yeah, you want to communicate to the interviewer how you're doing it.
Okay.
So you would definitely, and you're going to get a go at this yourself. You definitely say to the interviewer, okay, my approach to this case would be, and the way I like to see you communicate it, this is a little bit of coach preference, but I think the best way is you give me your top level first. Okay, so what I mean by that is like going back to the FIDX case, sorry, the flash case that I showed you. I would first say I'm going to break it down into 3 areas. What's the standalone value of Lamode? What are the synergies with flash? Are they capable of executing this? And then I'd go back to each of those headings and explain the lower level, like what I was going to get into. So I said standalone value. Well, under standalone value, I'm going to look into. Under synergies, I'm going to look into. I think that's a really good way of communicating. So you do your like top level first, then you go back through it and get into your like detailed data requests. And this is part of this like answer first communication that certainly management consultants really like. Great question. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, if we don't, then we can get into practicing. So the way we're going to do this, everybody, is that I will read out a case prompt, and because it's a foundation session, I'm also going to leave it on the screen. You probably won't get so lucky in most interviews, but I will also leave it on the screen. I will then allow everyone to ask clarifying questions. Okay, so anyone can ask clarifying questions. Again, remember, try and focus the questions on understanding the client and what they do and how they work, not on trying to answer the case. I will be polite but firm in telling you if your question has strayed into trying to answer the case, and I'll try and kind of coach you on what are good clarifying questions. When I think we've had enough, I'll tell you I think you've got everything you need. And then I will call forward one of my volunteers to give their structure. Okay. So Chris, Irene, Roman, etc., everyone who volunteered, you need to be prepping a structure to every case, okay? Because I might call you. Everyone else, you should be doing the same thing. Okay. Everyone on every case example should be prepping a structure. And you then compare it to what the brilliant volunteer comes out with, and then you kind of compare it to the feedback that I give. Okay. So now we're going to do some examples. Birthday lunch. So I'm going to try and give you an example here of how to structure a very everyday problem that you might come across. Okay. So tomorrow is your best friend's birthday. and you're trying to find the perfect place to get her and her friends together for lunch. What should you consider when deciding where to go? So over to anyone on the session to ask me a clarifying question. You're totally welcome to. Otherwise, please get building your structure. Okay. And I'll call one of my volunteers when I'm ready to give us the structure. But I'm expecting clarifying questions. There should be clarifying questions on every case. Okay. So who would like to ask a clarifier?
I have a oh, there's a hand raised.
That's okay. No. Eshin, hold on. So Ryan, I think, has got a question, then I'll come to you. So Ryan.
Yeah, could I ask how much money we're trying to spend on this lunch? Like budget?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. So remember the question here is, what should you consider when deciding where to go? The case question is not, where should we go? Okay. The case question is just asking you to build up a structure of issues that you would consider when deciding where to go. So in my opinion, what do restaurants cost would definitely be something you'd actually do as part of your structure potentially. However, I think that, you know, with regard to budget, are we trying to kind of be inclusive or exclusive is all about the goal, right? And I think that's really, really important. So the goal here is to be inclusive, to try and make sure most friends can come.
I wanted to ask, how many friends does our friend potentially want to bring?
Yeah, great question. So I think that's also something you'd consider about where to decide, right? I think again, part of it would be, well, where's big enough, right? For all the friends we want to bring. Again, she's trying to be like quite inclusive. So imagine it's a decent sized party.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
I can. What's the question?
I'm wondering if we all live in sort of a close proximity to each other, or if people have access to transportation, as sort of like how people are hoping to get there if they have access to car or train or whatever that
Yeah,
may
I
be.
think so. Again, I think like a location that suits everybody is going to be part of like, where do we pick, right? So where can people get to? I think again, in terms of the goal, what are we trying to achieve with this? We are trying to achieve something that's inclusive. Chris, yeah.
Can I ask the age of the participants?
Yeah, I think you can assume it's somebody of your age, like a peer to you. And we got a question in the chat, I believe. Yeah, so Seema, definitely what type of food are people interested in eating or what's available, I think is important. Yeah. So just with the chat, everyone, just definitely what sometimes happens is people start putting their answers in the chat. So just to pre-warn you, please don't put your answers in the chat. The only people I'm going to take answers from are going to be the volunteers. Okay. Obviously, very happy to answer specific questions about why a certain thing wasn't right or wrong, but can't unfortunately take everyone's answers. And please don't put your full structure in the chat because it will be a bit distracting for Chris or Roman or whoever's trying to present. All right, I'll give you a couple of minutes, and I'd love my volunteers to put their structures together. I would strongly encourage everyone else to put their structures together as well, because that is going to really help you learn from the session. Okay, put your own structures together, compare it to what the volunteer comes out with, compare it to my feedback, and that's how you'll learn. All right, let's just tidy up those structures, and then I'm going to call one of you forward. All right, I hope we're ready to go. Yeah, so Seema, how many people would participate and what would be the dress code? I think these are things that you would put into your consideration, right? They're not less so than clarifying questions. Okay, so Iman, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I'm eating.
Oh, sorry, do you want me to
Yeah.
call someone else?
No. It's okay. It's okay.
Okay, go for it,
I'm
go
good. So I sort of put my framework into like four different buckets. Um, the first one would be like, who is going, what's the size of the group, and like that is one sort of group. And then the second is the criteria we have for the actual venue of where we're going to eat. So, are we able to make a reservation given like how many people are attending and the size of the group? The location, we want it to be accessible for everyone. And then also given like people's food preferences, we also want to like take that into account when finding a space as well. Um, and then the third thing I have is sort of like constraints given that the reservation is tomorrow. Like we might not be able to get a space. Maybe we want to sit outside. Perhaps the weather is bad, or given our budget. So sort of like thinking about the constraints given like the timing and the availability and the amount of money funds we have for this. And so I guess those are the three main. Actually, my fourth one was not as good. So those were like the three sort of buckets I was thinking about.
I think it's good, Iman. It's a really nice effort at solving the problem. So I'll show you what we've got, okay? We basically break it down into three things, okay? What are the available options? What are the requirements of the group? And then how do we actually decide? Okay. So how do you understand the available options? Well, what's the geographical radius, right? We said that we want to be inclusive. So we need to think about what restaurants are relatively nearby, right? When are they open? Right? Who's open when we want this, right? And then what availability is there? For example, your friend might want a particularly late dinner or something, which doesn't suit all restaurants. So exploring this, we get a sense of what's available. Then we do where most people, I think, spent a lot of their time, which was what are the requirements and preferences? Okay, where should we go? So we would set up a framework that would understand all of these things, all the things you all talked about. What type of food? What kind of atmosphere do you want? What's the price? Right? How big's the group? Are there any dietary restrictions? From that, you get an overlap, right? Places that suit the requirements and are available geographically, hours-wise. How do we pick? Well, we might read some reviews. We could even think up a scoring system, or we could ask particularly important stakeholders like, maybe their partner or key friends, or maybe if there's any like families with kids coming along, we could ask them, that kind of thing. So why is this a good structure? It's basically the supply demand framework, right? But it's revisited for this case. So it's like, where can we go? Where should we go? And then it's a way of making that decision. Okay, so that's how we've broken it down. And the reason we include this one is to show you how an everyday problem that you might have can be approached with the business framework. Does anyone have any questions for me before we move on? Jacqueline, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, I was just curious, what are some of the clarifying questions you think are relevant to ask for this in particular, considering that the question is really asking for us to maybe have like a asking for us to clarify or think of the things that we would consider. I'm curious what you would ask as clarifying questions.
Yeah, great question, Jacqueline. So I think this is a particularly difficult case for not getting bogged down in asking things that really go under this number 2 section, right? I think, are we looking to, firstly, like, who is the person, right? So I think that's going to be an important thing. So what's their age? How mobile are they, right? That kind of stuff. You can imagine if it was your 95-year-old aunt, you might take this structure in like a different direction, right? And I think that point around like, what are we trying to achieve? Okay. And when we learn that it's like an inclusive thing where lots of people can come, that helps us make these points about geographical radius, budget, etc. Right? Whereas if the answer to that was, we're trying to make this a real like once off birthday to remember for a small number of people, it would change how we structure the problem. And I think that's pretty typical of clarifying questions. You try and understand really about them, the client, which in this case is the person having the birthday lunch, right? That's really the key thing. But thank you for the question. And I think the clarifying questions thing will become a little easier as we go on to more orthodox cases.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for the question. All right. Our next one is struggling gym. So our client is a local gym that's recently fallen on hard times. They're struggling to turn a profit and are not currently at capacity. What actions would you take to improve profitability? I'm open for clarifying questions. Otherwise, please put together your structures. I'd be delighted to hear them, but also to basically get a sense of any clarifiers that you want to ask.
I have a quick question. I'm wondering if how long that this gym has been struggling or when they identified the problem that they're not filling to capacity.
Yeah, sure. That's an excellent question, by the way, because I think it does vary if it's a long-standing problem. It's recent. It's in the last few months.
Okay.
Certainly max a year that they've been having this problem.
Gotcha.
Ryan, what would you like to ask?
I'd just like to ask, is it a high-end gym? Like what are their typical like clientele looks like?
So I think that is a really good question, Ryan. So it's such an important question for everyone to understand. Is this like, wealthy clients or is this regular clients? Right. It's a pretty like lower price gym.
Great,
Okay.
thank
So
you.
it's like on the high street, like Main Street, lower priced gym. Any other clarifying questions? Otherwise, if not, please get into those structures. Okay, we've got a clarifying question in the chat. I think definitely be building your structures, everyone, because I'm about to call someone. Iman's asking, how many employees do they currently have and what's the structure of their management? So Iman, it's a relatively small gym. Okay, so it's a one-off gym, right? It's not a chain. So they don't have many employees and it's just run by like one main manager with a couple of deputy managers. Okay, let's maybe take like 1 to 2 minutes and crack out our structures, and then I'm going to call someone. Okay. Ishan, do you want to give this one a go?
Yeah. Okay. So, at a high level, I really broke it down into like, I guess, three categories that I would want to explore more. So the first would be like the brand and the customer market. The next would be the pricing and the profitability model, and then the last would be competition. So on like brand and customer market, I'd want to know like we talked about that they're like more of like a cheaper gym, but I'd also want to know if that's like their brand perception in the market right now. I also want to know about like their type of customer demographics, like if they're really targeting like young or old gym goers. And then also like their current members, like what's their length of membership? Like really like are they do they have like a lot of repeat customers and have been struggling to get new ones, or are they just losing a lot of memberships right now? So that's on like the branding and the customer market. Then I'd want to know about like the pricing and profitability model. So like are they most gyms are subscription based, but are they like what's their breakdown of like how many people go yearly versus monthly plans? Because maybe that could help us um, understand a little bit more. Also, like their primary costs, like whether they own the gym itself, if they're renting, like we talked about, like how many employees they have. And then I guess like on that, like the management structure, but I know we like answered that a little bit. And then lastly, I'd want to know about the competition, like how much market share they have in the area. If it's like kind of understand better if the situation is because like there's a lot of competitors nearby, or if just the area they're in doesn't have enough demand for the gym. And also understand the profitability structures of their competitors and like their unit economics, like whether or not they're profitable.
Okay, thank you. Very good. So lots of the right issues. I think if you look at how we go about this, okay, it's a little bit more something Chris asked earlier about solution focused. Okay. So if you look at and I think one thing that's come up in the first couple of questions, words are very important in case interviews. They're exercises in precision. What they're specifically asking us is for actions to improve profitability. So we basically run through those actions. We split profitability into revenue and costs. Okay. That is a very classical way of doing it. How do you get revenue up? Well, basically, you get more members, or you get each member to spend more, or maybe both, right? How do you get costs down? Well, this is a very classical structure. We've done variable versus fixed. I'd probably prefer you to get into more detail on like what are the key costs of a gym. But this is a good place to start. Okay, and what we do then is under each of these categories, we start suggesting some specific things that you could do. So we could try and do more marketing, right? We could try and adjust our pricing, as Eshan suggested, maybe our branding is wrong, right? We could also try and keep more of our customers to reduce churn. How do we get the per member spend up, right? Well, one thing is to think about, right? Do we adjust kind of core membership fees up or down, right? And then we could offer additional services. This is a classic to make more revenue. All right, so this is a fairly typical profit and loss structure. Unless there's any questions, very happy to move on and get another case. Eshan, thanks a lot. I think that in terms of your structure, think you highlighted a lot of the right issues. I think this is a bit more focused on that case question, right? Which was, what are the solutions to this? That was the key thing. What are the solutions?
I have
So
a
all,
question. I
yeah,
was
go.
how like how would this work in an actual interview? Like, is the whole answer just making this structure, or is it like after we make the structure, we actually start investigating, into more detail how to
First
go
five.
about this?
Then we go into it. So this is the way it would work. It's a great question. The way it would work is you give me this, and either you would say to me or I would say to you, which do you think is the most important? And for example, you might be like, well, I think that probably it's kind of easier to get your existing members to spend more. So I'd want to start there. I'd want to have a look at like, how's average spend per member been? Has it gone down? Et cetera, et cetera. And then we go into some slides. I might get you to do some maths. We get some more slides. I probably ask you a creativity question. It goes on for like 20, 25 minutes from there.
Mhm. Okay, got it.
Eshin, what would you like to ask?
So like if you like for example like in an actual interview like hinted to me that like oh like your structure wasn't as focused on the profitability and like the actual like actionable solutions, do I then go about reframing my framework or do I just think about
Yeah.
that as I use my current
Yeah,
framework to
definitely. So,
continue?
so, so I definitely. So I would kind of get back to you and be like, okay, but what about this? What about this? And between us, we'd kind of reform the structure so it's focused on the right things. I don't get you kind of racing off in the wrong direction. Don't worry. Okay, let's make a move so everyone gets to come in. Drink Diva, a mid-sized Spanish soft drinks company, Drink Diva, is looking to diversify its business by investing in a new high-end restaurant chain in London. Drink Diva operates 10 European countries, and the UK is the second largest contributor to revenues after Spain. The restaurant chain sells gourmet, vegetarian, and vegan food and consists of 10 outlets. You've been hired to determine whether they should pursue investing in the restaurant chain and how best to maximize the opportunity. I'm open for clarifying questions. Otherwise, please get building those structures. Ryan, what would you like to ask me?
Are we comparing this restaurant chain against other restaurant? Like, are they looking to buy a restaurant chain regardless, or are we just treating this as like an isolated sort of
Yeah, very,
okay.
very good question, Ryan. I like that question. So, the main thing they'd like you to do is evaluate this opportunity, but it's a good idea to keep other options in mind. Okay. So it won't be the main thrust of what you do, but definitely keeping other options in mind is a very good thought. Chris.
Does Drink Diva have any offerings in the gourmet or health space currently?
Does Drink Diva have drinks offerings in this space?
Yeah, or any product, yeah.
Yeah. So obviously vegetarian, I mean, I suppose drinks can be vegetarian, but it's not really a fit, right? Like drinks aren't really vegetarian or not vegetarian. I would not describe them though as particularly health focused. I mean, they have diet versions, they have sugar-free versions, but like, and gourmet, somewhat. I mean, they're a regular soft drinks company. They have some more like niche offerings, but they're definitely not like, like some, you can imagine a soft drinks company that really sold itself as healthy, right? And it could be vegan maybe, and like they would be pretty expensive, right? That isn't really Drink Diva. Isham, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, I would just want to know if they're trying to incorporate it as part of their brand and kind of make it like one company or treat them as like two separate companies and like one operating kind of as a subsidiary almost.
Yeah, great question. So, it's a great question. They're just looking to invest in the chain, not even necessarily take it over.
I had a quick question. When it says to best maximize the opportunity, is this company looking to maximize profit? Is that what they're looking to do?
Very good question, Jeremy. Excellent clarifying question. So the key thing for them here is diversifying their revenues. Okay. Now, obviously, profit also is good news, right? But diversification is very important. They're worried they're too all in on soft drinks right now.
Thank you.
All right, we've got some good clarifiers. I think let's try and
I
move
have,
forward.
I have one clarifying as well.
Go on, Ronan. Yeah.
When we say investing, is it looking to genuinely just buy shares of the company, or when we say investing, are we meaning trying to get our drinks into this restaurant chain?
Yeah, so it's a private company, so they can't unfortunately kind of like log on to their favorite share app and buy a few, you know. They're going to invest financially. Now, obviously, some cross-business deals could also be part of the package. All right, everyone, let's build some structures. I'll come to you in a couple of minutes, and then we'll review what somebody's got. Okay. Irene, do you want to give me your structure to this one?
Yeah, definitely. And so the first question that we're looking at is whether or not we should pursue investing in this restaurant chain. And so the question that I asked myself is what makes a good investment? And so I kind of separated this into a couple different frameworks or a couple different buckets. First looking at growth, the next kind of looking at the company structure of this high-end restaurant chain. So like the leadership and the scalability. And I also looked at the target addressable market and the serviceable addressable market to see how long-term, if vegetarian, vegan food is something that can be profitable. So when I looked at like the growth of this chain, it says that there's currently 10 outlets. And so I wanted to look at the expansion rate, potential for growth, and what their current and projected sales look like. For their leadership, just looking at if it's a leadership structure that could support its scalability if we do choose to invest. And then when I looked at just sustainability, if this is like a trend or something that is a business that could sustain itself and continue to be profitable, I wanted to consider like the macro and micro trends of just like the food that they're offering and yeah, if even Drink Diva could potentially be offered within these restaurants. But yeah.
Good. I think that's very good. So I think you brought a lot of the right issues to the table. And I love the way you tried to like sit back and have a structure to your approach, right? I think that's exactly right. There's some overlap, some differences with what we have. So I'll show you. So what we have here is a very classic approach to an investment. Okay. Is it just full stop a good idea? Right? You know, if your uncle came to you and said, "Hey, I've got the chance to put $5,000 into this restaurant," would you take a look at it and be like, "Yeah, uncle, that's a good idea"? Or would you be like, "No, this looks like a bad investment"? Like, agnostic of who's doing it, is this business a good investment? Okay. Now, the second thing, and this is, I think, Irene, I think some of the stuff you talked about definitely comes under that heading. Second one, does it fit with us? Like, is it a good investment for us? I think a lot of you were probing the brand fit in your clarifiers. I agree, it's a concern, right? Irene brought up the chance of selling her own drinks. I think that's got to be part of this, surely, right? There could be some other synergies, right? Now, the next question is, can they do it? This is really important. When it's a business buying another business, you know, people like private equity do this all the time. It's what they do, right? They're good at M&A. Businesses are not necessarily good at M&A. So it might have been good to test in the clarifiers. Do they have experience of M&A? Right? Because that can be really important. Now, this is the point that was brought up, I think, by Jeremy, is what are the alternative options? Right? Are there other opportunities to diversify? Could we just partner with some big restaurant chains? You know, are there different acquisitions we could do? It's not necessarily only about this. All right, so Irene, thank you very much. I think you produced a good start for us there. And hopefully this introduces you all to a pretty classical investment framework.
I do have a quick question though.
Please, go for it.
Because truthfully, when I started to break this down, I wasn't quite sure. I was getting a little bit stuck. And so I was like rereading the case over and over again. But in the event that you're reading a case in an interview and you're stuck and you're not really sure where to go or what to do, like where do you recommend like directing your thoughts?
So this is why I think some of these classical frameworks could be useful. Okay. Why practicing a lot of cases is useful. Okay. And a lot of different types of cases. So if you were, for example, sat in an interview and you got a, you know, should this, I don't know, bottled water company invest in, you know, this soft drinks company, you can be like, well, and you're a bit stuck. You could be like, well, what were the headings in the Drink Diva case? And then see if they apply to this case.
Okay.
That's my top tip. You need this bank of cases that you've done to reflect on, which is why doing lots of cases is a good idea.
I see. Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Good put. A relative has come to you for help. She's developed a new vegan snack made of rice and oat milk called Good Pud. She loves the product, but she needs help selling it. She's not sold any units yet. How would you approach this challenge?
Can I ask if my relative has any experience with any like food products?
Yeah, good question. No, she's an enthusiastic cook and baker, but no experience in the business.
What is her ultimate goal here? Is she trying to start a business? Is she trying to doing this just for fun, or is she trying to just make some money on the side?
Yeah, great question. So this is a real passion for her. So she's really doing it to get the product that she's passionate about out to people. But I mean, if this works, this could be her full-time thing. All right, let's try and get a structure together. I think because of the timing with wanting to give you a tour of the platform, I think I'll finish up on this one. Okay, so I believe I'm right in saying that Roman and Eshan, you haven't had a go yet, right? So I'll call both of you in to do this one.
I have.
Apologies, it's Chris who hasn't had a go. Sorry, I misread my list. Chris and Roman, I will call you in to do this one. All right, let's maybe do 60 seconds, then we better get on to this. All right. Chris, do you want to go first?
Sure, I can go. So I split it up into three main like high level things. So I did like branding, manufacturing, and sales and marketing. So regarding branding, I would ask, how would this like product be different slash stand out? Like, is this product going to be more homemade? Is it going to be all natural? Obviously, like there's a lot of competition. So how would this like be spaced out so you can like differentiate it as a competitive advantage? The next thing is manufacturing for me. Like, are we going to be making this in a kitchen, in a factory? Is this going to be like, I feel like this also would really inform scale. Like, are we hoping to make like a couple units, or are we hoping to make hundreds or thousands and thousands of units, even in the short term? And lastly, sales and marketing, which I would be thinking, would this be sold in grocery stores, cafes, or even just like a stand on the side of the street to start with? And also, how are we going to spread this? Is this spread through word of mouth? Are we spreading it through like Instagram or something like that? That also gives you a good sense of like who your target market is.
Got it, Chris. Very good. Thank you. Roman, do you want to give this one a go?
Yeah, I had a somewhat similar answer with a few differences. So one of my buckets, I have four different buckets. The first one is help her decide if it's the right challenge for her, whether she has, the time, capital, what else she needs to get this started. And then similarly, manufacturing, what are her production capabilities, packaging capabilities, product approval, FDA, and then help her determine her business model. Does she want this to be e-commerce, or does she want, to open a bakery? Does she want to try and get this into retail locations, etc.? And then based on the business model, the fourth bucket would be, finding her customers, sales and marketing, etc.
All right, both of you, very well done. I mean, really, this is a tough one, right? And people really struggle on this normally. And what I loved about both of you was you didn't try and, this is clearly not a strategy problem. And what everyone else is, they take strategy frameworks and try and like shoehorn them onto it, right? You both were like, this is a process problem. So really well done for that. I think that the only thing I'd say is you both went quite broad on your process. Okay. She's very keen on the selling of it, right? That she has a problem with. I think, and so you maybe could have clarified that with me. But I think between you produce some really insightful stuff, on what we need to do here. So what we have has a lot of similarities. We're just more focused on the selling. Okay. And probably a little more practical on things like build a business plan, right? A little more early stage, whereas you were both kind of already up at the industrial manufacturing, right? We're down at the build a business plan, find some staff kind of thing, but get a pilot going with a few stores. But, Roman, for example, you called out the need to raise capital. We've got that here. So I think both of you did a really good job. I just think we were maybe a step earlier in the process and a step more onto sales than you guys were. And maybe you could have clarified that a bit more. But I think in general, you both did a really good job there of producing something process orientated. Awesome. So I'm now just going to talk to you a little bit about how to prepare for success. And I'll try and leave 5 minutes at the end for questions. Okay. So I will take you around the CaseCoach platform in just a second. The first thing is, please tell us what you think of today's session. Okay. Just take a screenshot. Tell us if it was good. Tell us what could have been better. You know, we've been doing this for a few years at Brown now. We always love trying to improve the session. So if there's anything that could have been better about today, please let us know. If there's anything that was really good about today, please let us know, because then we'll make sure we do it next time. So please do give us your feedback, and I'll probably bring this up again in a second. But snap it now if you can. Okay, I'm just going to bring up the CaseCoach platform for you. I will give you another chance to grab that QR code in a second. So what I'm going to show you now is just some of the key places that you can go for information on CaseCoach. Okay, so let me just share my screen to make sure you guys get this. So, oh, hang on, I've got a question, I think. Over, thank you. And so here we are. So this is casecoach.com. Hopefully that's knowable by you all. Okay, you all have a login to this. The one question I cannot answer is, how do you log into CaseCoach using the Brown systems? Okay, that is the one question I'm not qualified to answer, but there are other people who are very qualified to answer it for you, and I'm sure you know who they are. This is how you get on. Okay, so I've been asked to highlight a few things for you. One is the case library. This is an amazing resource for you. You can sort these cases by sector, by what skill they stretch you on, okay, and by function. What do we mean by that? We mean, you know, is it profitability? Is it growth? Is it M&A? And what I said to Irene earlier about, you know, when you're stuck, reach back to cases you've done before that are like the same function as this one. This is why it's so important to practice a range of cases. So, you know, you can be like, I want a pricing case that is in, you know, chemicals, could be going too narrow here, and you like bring it out, okay, and there isn't one, okay, that was a bit narrow, but you bring out the pricing cases, and you get all these different cases that are going to test you out on pricing. Okay, you might say, okay, instead I want to do a cost reduction case. Okay, and you see that you then get a whole bunch of cost reduction cases. Okay, so, and they are ranked by score, so you can see that margin call people are not liking so much, whereas child placement services, one of my favorite cases on CaseCoach, people are, you know, correctly rate it extremely highly because it's a great case. Asian airline, it's a little harsh, I think it's a good case. And you can go through these. I would also call out the fact that we have these video cases. These are really great, I think, just to watch a video to see how a whole case interview works. I think it was either Roman or Jeremy earlier asked, like, what does this really look like in the real thing? Watching a whole one of these videos will really help you just get how an interview works. Okay, so I really, really recommend that. So if you're not sick of me, I am presenting in a couple of them, but there's also some where I'm not. And you kind of see someone go through one of these cases, and it's really, really helpful. We also talked about practicing with other people. We have the practice room. Okay, this is amazing because you can practice with people all around the world, with people who are trying to practice cases right now. And you see their ranking. So after the session, people rank them. So you can see who's considered like a really good interviewer, okay, by everybody else. So I really recommend the practice room for getting your case practice done. It's totally free. Let's go in there and practice with people. Other than that, I'd really recommend our courses. So we have a course for every aspect of the case interview. Okay, we take you from the start of your recruitment process all the way through the case interview. And we have special courses for things like maths, structuring, judgment and insights, etc., etc. All right, so that's the CaseCoach platform, casecoach.com. Strongly recommend you spend a lot of time there. Okay. I'm just going to go back into our slides just to finish with that QR code and take maybe any questions. Scotty, thank you for putting the CaseCoach link up there. That's really, really helpful. Here's our feedback slide again, everyone. And we've now just got a few minutes to take any questions. It really can be about anything. Okay, so delighted to help you. Ishan, what would you like to ask?
First of all, thank you so much. But for the cases with video function, like on CaseCoach, are those like you just watch the case and just understand them, or is it like there is a case attached, you do the case first, and then you go back and watch it after?
Yeah, great questions. There's two ways to use them. There is a case attached. So if you'd like to give it a go first and then watch the video, you can. If you're like, I just want to see how an interview works, you can just go straight in there and watch it. I think they're both good choices.
What would you recommend, like in terms of?
I think it matters what stage you're at. If you're at the very beginning, I recommend just watching. If you're more developed in your practice, definitely do the case first and then watch how someone handles it.
Thank you.
Not at all. I often recommend people start out just by watching one of them to get a sense of how a case session works. All right, who else would like to ask a question? Can be about anything that we covered today. Can be about preparing for cases, consultancy, anything.
I have a question. James, were you a consultant yourself?
Yes, I was. Yeah. So I worked for Boston Consulting Group, BCG. I started out in the London office. So I was in your seat about a decade ago, applying to London, a little bit more than that, actually. And then while I was at BCG, I switched over to the Dubai office, which was super fun for a couple of years. But I was also very involved in recruiting at BCG. So I was an interviewer and I used to do a lot of like on-campus stuff for the firm as well. So it was a pretty natural thing to then do a bit of CaseCoach after I left.
Mm-hmm. Sweet, very cool. And then one follow-up would be during your time consulting, were most of the projects that you were working on, were they at all related to, some of the, I guess, the problems that we'll see in these cases, or is it a lot of times, a massive corporation that you're working for on a very specific,
Yeah,
set of a
great
problem?
question. Great question. So I think sometimes, basically the cases are normally based on client work, but not all client work makes a fun case. Okay. So
Mhm.
I'll give you an example. There's a couple of cases on the CaseCoach website that I wrote and they're based on my client work. Okay. So some of the details are tweaked, but if you go and do a case called Socratic Schools, it's actually a video case, okay, that I'm running. That's based on real client work that I did in the Middle East. There's a case on there about a UK conglomerate, okay, that is based on a real client case that I did as well.
Okay. That's very
Some
cool.
of it is definitely based on real client work. People tend to obviously pick the projects which, as you say, are maybe a bit broader, like real strategy questions, rather than a client saying, hey, we've got this kind of niche problem, but it's really important to our business. Can you come and unpick it for us?
Cool.
Who else has got questions?
Oh, sorry.
Go for it, Irene. Go for it. Go for it.
I have a question about like the recruiting process. So typically when you are recruiting for like a summer internship consulting role, I'm assuming you throw in your application, is the first interview that you have typically like a case interview?
Yeah, so it really matters, okay? And it matters on the firm, it matters on the office, et cetera, et cetera. Typical pattern is you throw in your application, they like you, they want to give you an interview, okay? Typically, they might give you some form of test first. Could be like a maths and reasoning test, it could be an online case. And then they move you to the human interviews. Some people do human interviews and the tests at the same time.
I see. Okay, gotcha.
No worries. And generally, best way to prepare for an online case or anything like that would be, in my opinion, is like standard human case prep.
And these, oh,
Go
sorry.
for it. No, go for it. So I've got a question for Raquel, but finish your question first, then I'll take Raquel's question.
And then these tests that you're doing prior to some of these interviews, are those anything worth preparing for, or is that just logic?
A lot of it is just logic. So it is that the idea from their point of view is definitely you don't need to prepare. What I would strongly advise is just chat someone who's done it for that specific firm before. The more recent, the better, because they change them quite often. And just get a sense from them of like, can you prepare or not? And if you can, be like, okay, so what should I do? Raquel asks, how do you approach the maths if you're dealing with big numbers? And then how do you do a market sizing question? So case maths is definitely a struggle for some people. I think firstly, we have got great drills on CaseCoach. I strongly recommend the maths drills. Okay. So you go in there on the practice session, you go practice drills, maths drills. Okay. In terms of breaking down big numbers, definitely feel free to use like simplifying techniques. So if it's like 2,977, divided by 18.4, you should feel free to be like, is it okay if I do 3,000 divided by 18? Right? And then feel free to break those numbers down. Feel free to say, for example, that 3,000 over 18 is the same as, say, like 1,500 over 9, right? 1,500 over 9 is the same as like 500 over 3, et cetera, et cetera. Feel free to simplify your numbers and feel free to round your numbers. We quite like logical hack techniques like that. On market sizings, so a market sizing is a specific type of exercise. It's a little different to a whole case. It's where we ask you something like, how many cars are there leased in Rhode Island? Like that kind of thing, right? It really depends on the problem. But the key to breaking down a market sizing is you shouldn't ever be guessing. Okay, try and break it down to where you are using information which you can reasonably estimate. So like in Rhode Island, it might be something like, what's the population of Rhode Island, right? Keep simplifying the question until you get to those kind of numbers. Because obviously you can't guess the number of cars leased, but even if you were like, well, I'm going to start with the number of cars, I think it's about this, and then I'm going to decide how many are leased. You don't know how many cars there are, right? But if you started breaking it down to like, this is the population of the state, this is how many people are of driving age, right? Let's break that then down in certain demographics, like maybe over 80, a lot of people don't, maybe, or maybe over 40, a lot of people don't lease a car. Over 80, a lot of people don't have a car. Younger people are more likely to lease, these kinds of things. You can start breaking that population down, and you've stopped guessing and you've started estimating. In a quick answer, that's my best tip. We have market sizing cases on CaseCoach. So again, you can choose case type estimations and you can practice some market sizings. Do we have any other questions?
I
Go
have
for
one
it.
more recruiting type of question. Is it standard in order to get an interview from your resume that you're going to need to get a referral from someone that works at the company?
Yeah, so it is not necessary, but it's very helpful.
Okay. So
So
would
again,
you,
go on, yeah.
I was just going to say, would you recommend then that a major part of our, application process isn't just applying to different places, but also making sure we connect with people that work at those companies?
Definitely. And I think that, you're very lucky, right, in terms of the institution you're attending. Okay. I'm sure there's networking events. I'm sure there's alumni who have worked at these firms. And what I would strongly recommend is try and get either a partner or somebody who works in the specific office you want to work at. Okay. Both are good. A partner in the office is the dream, but like that's pretty difficult to get, right? So, with all due respect, if you meet somebody who's like, hey, I'm a consultant in the Jakarta office, and you're like, yeah, I really want to apply to the Boston office. It's like, okay, he's got a friend in the Jakarta office. Like, isn't that helpful? Whereas if you're like someone in the Boston office recommended you, that's pretty good. Similarly, if it's like a partner in another office, they're also like, okay, wow, a partner recommended him. There must be something to this, right? So that's what I would recommend. But any recommendation you can get is great, but preferably either a partner or somebody who works in the office you're applying to.
Got it.
Not a problem. Okay, everybody, unless anything is burning, I'm going to close it down there. And yeah, Scotty, thank you. Yeah, so LinkedIn is a great suggestion. I think Brown Connect sounds like an internal thing you all have, which is a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, Brown
Right.
Connect Plus is for alumni and students to use. So you can, as a student, you can use both and kind of cross-reference and go from there.
That would be my top tip. I mean, if there's a Brown alum working at the office you want to apply to, that is a great start, to be honest with you. And the other thing is if you're feeling pushy, is get them to practice a case with you. Okay, because that'll be really helpful. But use it wisely, okay? Don't like blow it now when you're not very good.
You might think about reaching out to more junior alumni initially, just to, learn about the role. Maybe you're unsure, just to sort of get used to networking. And then as you progress in your networking skills, then kind of move up the chain. Because obviously, as you get more senior, you'll want it to be a little bit more, for lack of a better word, polished.
Yeah.
And perhaps if you are, reaching out to a recent grad and you just want to know what is their day like or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a brilliant suggestion. Like the partner who's an alum is like the dream connect, but like, yeah, you don't want to blow it with a question of like, what's the dress code like in the office or something? What's the coffee machine like? All right, everyone, this has been really fun. I've really, really enjoyed doing this. I hope that it's helpful. I hope it's been useful to you all. And I wish you the absolute best of luck with your case interview preparation and with whatever jobs you decide to go for, or internships you decide to go for. So thank you very, very much for hosting us, Scotty, as ever. And thank you everyone for giving up your time to attend.
Thanks, James. And thanks for the students for participating.
Yeah, thank you. And everyone who volunteered, you made the session. So thank you very, very much for volunteering. I really appreciate it.